Hello, everyone. In this lecture, we will be discussing uh, Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. Uh, we will be covering here the, the various positions that you can hold in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. We'll talk about some of the uh, committees in those bodies. We will continue with the discussion of congressional districts and how those districts are created and what the requirements are. And then we'll talk about the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate, along with some of the powers that the Constitution gives to them. So let's start with the House of Representatives. In the House, under Article 1 of the Constitution, it states that the House of Representatives has elections every 2 years. And the effect of having elections every 2 years is to make the House of Representatives extremely responsive to the people who will vote to either keep them in office or replace them with somebody else. The founders intended it to be this way. They felt that the House of Representatives would be the place where the people could speak their mind. Remember, originally the Senate was not a body that was elected directly by the people, but was instead originally appointed by the legislatures of the various states. As we saw when we looked at some of the amendments to the Constitution, that has been changed, and now the Senate is elected just like the House of Representatives is. But originally, that was the thinking of the founders, was that the House of Representatives would be the place where the people could have their say. In the House of Representatives, there are various positions. The leader of the House of Representatives is referred to as the Speaker of the House. Uh, there are also some of the other positions, prominent positions in the House would include the Majority Leader, which represents the person who is, as the as the title indicates, is the majority of the two parties. The two majority parties would be either Democratic or Republican, and on occasions when the Democrats are in charge, most likely a Democrat is the Speaker of the House, and the uh, most senior individual on the opposing party would be, you know, the majority leader for the opposing party. Another individual we should talk about is the whip. A whip. Uh, Really, the name of the whip comes from back in the olden days when they had fox hunts. The individuals participating in the fox hunt would be on their horseback, and there'd be dogs assisting with the hunt, and the fox would invariably try to hide in the bushes. And the purpose of the whip in a fox hunt is to um, whip the bushes, literally, to scare the fox back out into running so that they can continue the hunt. In the context of the House of Representatives or the Senate, similar positions exist in both chambers. The purpose of the whip is to bring the legislators out from the bushes. And effectively, in reality, what they do is they make deals. The whip is the one who gets the votes together and assesses how much support there is for any particular piece of legislation that's being considered, and effectively whips up support for a bill. An effective whip will move up. Eventually, every uh, Speaker of the House has, at one time or other, been an effective House whip. Now, the committees in the House, let me bring up this list of committees because it's, yeah, let's see what we got here. Hang on a second, I'm bringing it up. Share it with you. We can look at some of these committees. And this is a list of all the present committees that are in existence in the House of Representatives. You can see that there's committees on agriculture, there's appropriations, armed services, budget, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these, all of them, of course, have different roles. And generally what happens is when you get elected to Congress, you will be appointed to several of these committees. So that you will, that's where the work gets done, is when you're seated in one of these committees. Some of these committees are of particular importance. The Rules Committee, for example, is the committee that determines what legislation is going to be considered and when. If you want to have your bill considered by the House, well, you need to have friends on the Rules Committee, because that's the committee that decides what legislation will be considered by the House, and your bill won't be approved unless at some point it comes out of the committee that it was originally assigned to and is considered by the House as a body. The Ways and Means Committee is another important committee, which figures out the ways and means of funding your bill once it's been passed. So that's, every one of these has different jurisdiction, which means different authority to consider different types of bills. Each one has their own purpose. Some of these are only temporary committees. Here is a select committee that is considering the strategic competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. That's a fairly new, a new one. There is this one, task force, that is investigating the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump. We know that there were 2 different assassination attempts on him during the run-up to the election. We take a look at these down here. This is a list of the former standing committees. These have completed their work. It says here that here's a committee that was considering the climate crisis. There's some documents available if you wanted to take a look at that and see what they concluded. Economic disparity was the subject of this former select committee. The modernization of Congress, which we certainly hope that they were able to get something done there. So those are some of the former committees that existed during earlier times. All right, so we're going to get out of that for right now. There are 435 members in the House of Representatives. And the members of these committees tend to be fairly large. Each committee, some committees have 30 members, some have more, some have less, but there is considerable overlap in each committee, so that you may serve on multiple committees. And this has a beneficial effect when you're trying to get a bill passed. You can make deals with somebody who shares your work on a different committee to get your bill through a committee that you're also sitting on, a different committee. All right, so next we talk about the Senate. There are 100 members of the Senate. The Senate has committees similar to the ones that are present in the House of Representatives, and there is one difference here in the Senate as opposed to the House of Representatives. Well, there's a couple of differences, but the one I want to point out is who is the president of the Senate. The president of the Senate is the vice president of the United States. So this is one of the few cases where there is an overlap between the executive branch and the legislative branch. The vice president clearly is a member of the executive branch, but he also serves as the president of the Senate. As president of the Senate, he only has one specific duty. He may vote to break a tie. Otherwise, he's not permitted to vote. He or she is not permitted to vote. And other than occupying the chair and running the Senate, that's pretty much all that the president of the Senate, the vice president sitting as president of the Senate, that's all that that he or she does. The vice president doesn't always have to attend as president of the Senate, however, and generally on those occasions when the vice president is absent from the Senate, they assign that role to the Senate President pro tem, the temporary president of the Senate. And they have that position because quite often the vice president does not appear in the Senate because there's not, as sitting as president, the vice president really doesn't have a whole lot to do. So if there is no need for the vice president to come in and vote to break a tie, generally the vice president attends to other duties. In order to be, well, let's see, we didn't talk about the qualifications of the House, so let's do that quickly before we move on. In order to be in the House of Representatives, you need to be at least 25 years old. You need to have been a citizen of the United States for no less than 7 years, and you need to inhabit the state that you're going to be representing. In the Senate, you need to be slightly older, 30 years old. You need to have been a citizen for 9 years, and again, you need to inhabit the state that you represent. The Senate calls itself a continuously deliberating body, and that outlines one of the fundamental differences between the House of Representatives and the Senate. There are 100 members in the Senate, as I said, and the term of office as a senator is 6 years, considerably longer than the term of office of a member of the House. And as such, the Senate allows itself the luxury of debating a matter for as long as anyone has anything to say about it. In the House, if you compare the difference between the two, there's online channels that are dedicated to observing the work that's going on in both the House and the Senate. If you watch a session of the Senate, you will see them, as I said, speaking for as long as they care to speak about something. There is no rush in the Senate. In the House, on the other hand, there is always a rush. There's 435 members in the House. And because of that, every one of them is trying to make a name for themselves, and they do that by speaking so that their constituents can see them at work. But because there's 435 members, the Rules Committee quite often will severely limit the amount of time that they have to debate in the House. So when there's a debate going on in the House, whoever has the floor for the moment and is conducting the debate, it might be interrupted by somebody who wishes to participate in the debate. And if whoever has the floor chooses to concede the floor to some other speaker, they will do so, but will limit, say, I will give the floor to my friend from, say, Virginia for 5 minutes. And then, so that means for 5 minutes, that person can speak. At the end of that 5 minutes, it goes back to the original person. So the time is severely limited in the House. And that's, as I said, it's because there's so many members in the House and their term of office is only 2 years. So they have to work hard to make their name. Back to the Senate now, one of the things that the Senate does that the House has no part of is there's a number of things that where the Senate is required to give advice and consent to something that the president does. This includes treaties. The Senate must give advice and consent to any treaties entered into by the executive branch. Appointments to certain offices, and there really isn't a hard and fast rule on this. It's just that when the office is created, Congress will determine at that time whether an appointment to that office requires the advice and consent of the Senate. Judicial appointments require the advice and consent of the Senate. Now, what that means is it's not so much the advice part, but rather the consent part that is significant. When the president appoints somebody to a federal judge position, that person will not take office unless the Senate agrees that a person is qualified to take office. Of late, the Senate has occasionally refused to even address a judicial appointment if they are politically opposed to some of the positions that judicial aspirant might hold. But all right, well, let's move on to the next area, and that is districting. Now, the way that things work in the House of Representatives, every state has a certain number of representatives. Florida presently has 30 representatives in the House, and so what that means is Florida has 30 congressional districts, and one member of the House is representing each one of those districts. Different states have different numbers of representatives because the amount of representation that we get in the House of Representatives is based directly on the population of each state. Florida is growing in population, but it's nowhere near the population of California, which is the largest state in the Union. Following close on its heels is Texas. Last time I looked, California, I think, has 54 representatives. Texas, I believe, has 40 representatives. As I said, Florida has 30. The Congress doesn't really, the Constitution doesn't really specify how congressional districts are to be created. And for the longest time, it was entirely left up to the states to decide where their districts will be and how they're to create them. It wasn't until the early 1960s that the U.S. Supreme Court began looking at the districting issue. And this is because the Supreme Court, for most of its life, has since its inception in the 1790s, has stayed away from what it felt were political questions. And one of those issues that it had largely said was a political question had to do with the characteristics of a congressional district. It wasn't until 1962 that the U.S. Supreme Court in Baker versus Carr, and let me bring up that case so that we can share it. It wasn't until 1962, in this case, Baker versus Carr, that the U.S. Supreme Court finally made the tentative step towards allowing it to consider the propriety of the creation of various districts in the individual states. And the only question really decided in Baker versus Carr was, does the Supreme Court have jurisdiction over questions of legislative apportionment? And the answer is, again, they're looking at, is this a political question or something different? And what they concluded was that the 14th Amendment requires equal protection, and based on that, the size of a judicial district can be addressed as a matter for the court to determine. So that leads us to the next two cases, the first of which is Reynolds versus Sims. And in this case, in Reynolds versus Sims, the petitioner, Mr. Sims, was concerned that the size of each district and the number of eligible voters in each district was not the same. In fact, it was considerably different. One district had 41 times as many eligible voters as those in some of the other districts within the state. So the question was, does that system that allowed political districts to be of different population, whether that violates the 14th Amendment? And let me bring this case up here so we can share the image. Here is Reynolds versus Sims. I think it's interesting that if you wanted to actually listen to the argument that there's a recording of it here. You could click on, and this website, they retain actual recordings of the argument back in 1963. But ultimately, what the conclusion was in this case was that this is, as they determined in Baker versus Carr, this is a matter for the court to evaluate. They do have the authority to evaluate political districts, and they concluded that the idea is that we should have every vote should be of approximately equal in strength. So where you have one district that is, as I said before, 41 times the number of citizens as those of another district, the vote in that district is weakened compared to the votes in other districts. And so the U.S. Supreme Court said in Reynolds versus Sims that that's not constitutional and violates the 14th Amendment. In a similar case, Westbury versus Sanders, the court addressed a very similar issue in Westbury, ultimately concluding that they want to have districts of approximately equal size where it is practicable. So based upon that, what the states began doing, and you know, this is linked to something else in the Constitution, which mandates that they count the population of each state every 10 years. We refer to that as the decennial census. And the reason why they do that, the primary reason, is to determine what political representation each state is entitled to have in the House of Representatives. Where the population of a state increases, they're going to get more representation, and when that happens, the number of districts will increase, as you might expect, and that means that they need to draw new lines for each of the districts that exist. That process of drawing the lines is something that has been at issue in each one of these cases that we've talked about. The lines, as we see from Westbury versus Sanders and Reynolds versus Sims, they must be drawn so that the population of each district needs to be approximately equal, or as closely as they can manage. Some other issues that come up in the area of redistricting, though, is one of the things that happens a lot is that when they go about redistricting, whoever is in charge of the state, meaning which political party is supreme in the state where the redistricting is taking place, they will do everything that they can to make sure that their political party remains in power. If they can arrange the districts so that if it's a Republican majority, for example, if they can arrange the districts so that each district has a majority of Republicans in it, then that will ensure that Republicans remain in power. One of the things that they cannot do, however, is they cannot redistrict in order to unfairly affect a minority party. The one of the cases that addresses that is this case, League of United Latin American Citizens versus Perry. And this Perry, in this case, was the governor of Texas. And in 2006, they made an effort to redistrict in Texas, and what they apparently were doing was, unfortunately, they were diluting racial minority voting strength. You can't do that deliberately, the Supreme Court concluded. The part of the plan violating the voting rights, part of the plan did violate the Voting Rights Act. You can't deny Latino voters as a group the opportunity to elect a candidate of their own choosing. So, yes. Similarly, an effort to draw a district that would place people of a minority group, create them a district that is primarily members of that minority group. That too does not pass muster. You're not allowed to create a district that is created with race in mind. So in this next case, which is Shaw versus Hunt, let's bring it up here so you can see it. Yeah, in this case, Shaw versus Hunt, the state of North Carolina attempted to create congressional districts that incorporated a large number of people of the same race. And the Supreme Court said well, they use the term gerrymandering here is what we're talking about. Racial gerrymandering violates the 14th Amendment. You can't create a district for the purpose of either incorporating a large number of people of the same race, or by diluting the voting power of people of a particular minority group. So the only thing that is permitted when we are redistricting or gerrymandering, if you want to use that term, the only thing that is permitted is you are permitted to consider a political affiliation. You're not allowed to consider the minority groups, gender, or race when evaluating how you're going to set up your districts. So those are the general rules on districting. The people have challenged this so many times, and people who are members of a political party tend to think that it's unfair for a member of the party in power to have the ability to set up districts that will result in the majority party remaining in power. So far, the U.S. Supreme Court has refused to step in on that. They view that as a political question, so they're not going to. They don't. They don't go there. So now let's talk about what it means to be a member of Congress. As a member of Congress, members of both House and the Senate are paid $174,000 a year. A few make a little bit more than that. The Speaker of the House gets $223,000 approximately. The Senate's President pro tem gets around $193,000 a year. They get some perks and benefits in addition to that. They have travel allowances, and if you have been a member of Congress for 25 years, you get a pension when you retire. They also get something called franking privileges, which I'm not sure what the benefit is of that anymore in these days. But in the olden times, before the era of email and online services, the members of Congress got free mail. They can send things out by mail for free, because generally that's how you would communicate with your constituents, was by mail. Nowadays with email, you don't have to do that quite so much. So what we're going to do next is take a look at the Constitution and some of the expressed powers. In Article 1, Section 8, this provides a list of the express powers which Congress has. Perhaps the most important of these for the benefit of Congress is the ability to lay and collect taxes. That's how Congress gets anything done, is by imposing taxes on, originally it was on exports and imports, But since the amendment of the Constitution in the early 1900s, they are also allowed to tax our income. So Congress has the power to impose taxes. They can borrow, which this is one of the significant differences between the Congress, the federal Congress, and state governments. The state governments are required to maintain a balanced budget. They're not allowed to run a deficit, as they say. Our Congress, the federal Congress, has the full authority to do deficit spending if they wish to, because they have the power to lay and collect taxes and borrow money on the credit of the United States, and that's how they manage it. The states are not permitted to borrow money on the credit, not on credit from any other foreign countries. So that's part of the reason why they have to maintain a balanced budget. All of these, these here on this list continue. If we continue to go down it, these are all the powers that the express powers that are included. We've already talked about the necessary and proper clause. What this does is it gives some a bit of wiggle room, you might say, for Congress to act in order to lay and collect taxes and pay the debts and provide for the common defense. You might have that can be stretched a little bit to include, as we saw in one of the cases that we looked at, that Congress has the power to create a national bank to facilitate doing those kinds of things. So that's the idea in the necessary and proper clause of Article 1, Section 8. Now, let's talk about how you actually go about getting a bill passed. Now, there's a old movie that I love to watch, not all the time, but I've watched it several times, and it's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and in it does a pretty good job of outlining how a bill is created and then presented to Congress. The way it works is this: you come up with an idea, and in that old movie, the idea was to create a countryside ranch of sorts where young boys could go and learn more about nature. This is an old movie, so there was no discussion about what girls would be doing. This was just for boys. So nowadays they wouldn't they wouldn't do it that way. But this was his idea, the protagonist's idea, and so he drafts up the bill, and he submits it to the clerk. And there's a clerk in both houses, whether you're in the House of Representatives or in the Senate. And your bill then, when you give it to the clerk assigns it a number, and that number will follow your bill throughout its entire lifetime until it's either passed or it dies. And honestly, the vast majority of bills that are introduced through Congress do wind up dying because, let's be fair, the vast majority of them are dumb ideas. What happens is the bill goes from the clerk. The clerk then assigns that bill to a committee. And as we saw, there's committees for all different kinds of things. So your bill will be sent to the committee that has the strongest jurisdiction over that bill. If it's a bill dealing with, as we say, creating some kind of a boys' ranch, I suppose that might go to the Agriculture Committee, let's say. So that committee gets it. And in the committee, they will then explore it and tear it apart and see whether they like it or not. And as I said, the vast majority of bills, after being assigned to a committee, they never come back out of that committee because they're just not very good ideas. But this is a good idea, and so let's say that the committee loves this idea. And so what happens is, after being assigned to the committee, let's get this out. Every bill is read 3 times. So the first time that it's read is when it was submitted to the clerk. Every bill is published in the Congressional Register And the assumption is that all members of Congress are reading every bill that's submitted. It goes to into the committee, and as we said, the committee loves your idea, so it comes back out of the committee for debate, and that is the second reading of the bill. If during the debate there are amendments, or even if there's not amendments, the final version of the bill is then created, and based on whatever modifications were made, the Senate will then vote on that bill, the final version of the bill, and it's approved. So yay, congratulations. Now your bill goes to the other chamber. If you started in the Senate, it goes to the House of Representatives. If it started in the House, after it's passed, it goes to the Senate. And then it goes through the exact same procedure all over again. That's part of the reason why it takes such a long time to get bills passed through Congress. Each bill must be approved by each chamber. If it goes through the Senate and gets approved, and then it goes to the House of Representatives. If the House of Representatives amends it in some way, well, then it has to come back to the Senate for adoption. So generally what they do in those circumstances is they will set up a committee, a joint committee between House and Senate to review the bill and see if they can agree on whatever changes were made. In any event, the identical bill has to be approved by both the House and the Senate. So ultimately, that's what will happen. Then the bill, in your case, because your bill is a great idea, then after Congress has approved that bill, it goes to the President of the United States, who can sign it into law, or he can not sign it. And if he doesn't sign it, and assuming that Congress remains in session, the bill can become law without the president's signature. And the alternative, if Congress goes out of session, the president can do what's called a pocket veto by not signing it and allowing it to expire. The president also could affirmatively veto the bill, which means he's going to say, I veto this bill, and then send it back to Congress. When it gets to Congress, Congress then has the ability to override the veto. Both chambers must vote by a 2/3 vote in order to override the veto. So as you might expect, it's very uncommon for a bill to be able to, for the Congress to be able to override the president's veto. It's difficult to get a 2/3 vote from both chambers. We need to talk about filibusters. In the Senate, they have filibusters. They don't have filibusters in the House of Representatives. What is the filibuster? A filibuster is an attempt by a member of the Senate to block passage of a bill or delay passage of a bill that member of Congress, that senator disagrees with. And because of the rules in the Senate, any member of the Senate can speak for as long as they have anything to say. And in the past, that has sometimes been used to block various bills. Sometimes it can be used to delay or block a Senate approval of a candidate for office, a judicial candidate, for example. They don't do filibustering in the House because of the nature of how debate is handled in the House. In the House of Representatives, the Rules Committee will only allow you X number of minutes to speak, and when those minutes expire, you're done. They're going to move on to some other business. But filibustering is a time-honored tactic that can be used in the Senate. The idea of filibustering actually comes from the early history of the New World. A filibusterer was sort of the equivalent of a land pirate. Somebody with some money and a few ships could invade some area of South America and loot and pillage as much as they wanted to until they were thrown out by an overpowering force. This process was called filibustering. And some witty individual at some point declared that a member of the Senate who was deliberately wasting time to try to block passage of a bill was no better than a filibusterer. And the idea was so popular that they took up the term. And that's now what they refer to as, it's a time pirate, you might say, filibustering. Some of the famous filibusterers include Senator Huey Long, who in 1935 spoke for 15 hours. He read from the telephone book. He read recipes for his favorite Southern dishes, like how to make cornbread and turnip greens. In 1947, a different senator spoke for more than 8 hours. Talked about his children, talked about his religion, talked about fishing, just whatever happened to cross his mind for 8 hours. The world record for filibustering, however, belongs to Senator Strom Thurmond, who was a senator from South Carolina. He spoke for 24 hours and 18 minutes. In 1957, he was attempting to block the passage of a Civil Rights Act. And of course, being from South Carolina, that's not too surprising that he might try to do that. There is a way to break a filibuster. If time is of the essence and you do need to move along with whatever it is we're trying to get passed in the Senate, you can invoke what's called the cloture rule. And cloture just means that at least 60 senators must agree to end the filibustering. If you can get, so that's a super majority. You know, there's 100 members in the Senate. If you can get 60 members of the Senate to agree that this guy needs to sit down, then then that's going to end the filibuster, and they will forcibly require the filibusterer to stop. Cloture is very rarely done. Out of 400 attempts at cloture in the last 100 years, only about a third of them have ever been successful. The only difference tends to be with judicial appointments. The Senate has since passed a rule that they don't allow filibustering of judicial appointments. But that's about the only difference. What are the non-legislative powers of Congress? First of all, Congress may propose amendments, and as we saw when we looked at the Constitution and the 27 amendments to the Constitution, all of the current possible adopted amendments were proposed by Congress. So that's one thing that Congress can do. They can propose amendments to the Constitution. Secondly, they decide what the electoral college votes are in any presidential election year. When after the electoral college casts its votes, the Congress meets on January 6th. They meet as an entire body, the entire House of Representatives plus the entire Senate, and meeting together, they open up what the electoral college votes are, and they tabulate what the votes are. And this is when we know the final determination of who has won the election. Third, Congress has the power to impeach. Now, the method used is to impeach somebody. Usually, this is used for people who are in public office, of course, public office, but usually it's people who are elected to public office. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. Federal judges have been impeached. L.C. Hastings, for example, was famously impeached for taking a bribe. He was a federal judge in South Florida. After he was impeached and thrown out of office, he ran for Congress and was elected. So, past evidence that you've taken a bribe is no barrier to you serving as a member of Congress. Three presidents have been impeached. Mr. Trump, of course, was impeached, but they They found him not guilty, and he remained in office. Prior to Mr. Trump, there was Andrew Johnson was impeached. He was the president who served after Abraham Lincoln, and his impeachment was over whether he could fire a member of President Lincoln's cabinet. You remember Lincoln was assassinated, but his cabinet remained on. And Lincoln's cabinet was made up of people who had been running for his office prior to his being elected. And oddly, he collected those people who had been trying to be president and appointed them to positions on his cabinet. Andrew Johnson didn't get along with it with most of those people, and so he attempted to fire one of them. I think it was Mr. Stanton, the Secretary of War. That's what they called the Secretary of Defense in those days. Andrew Johnson is widely viewed as not being a very successful president, and Congress attempted to impeach him over that, and he remained in office. Bill Clinton was also impeached in 1998 over the scandal of the Monica Lewinsky affair. He lied under oath about whether he had sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky, and so they impeached him. He too was acquitted. So you have to remember the term impeachment. You can be impeached but found not guilty. The term impeachment just refers to the trial. No president has been thrown out of office by impeachment. Richard Nixon probably would have been, but he resigned in office. He resigned from office before he could be impeached. So that's number 3. Number 4, all major appointments made by the president must be confirmed by the Senate by majority vote. So this includes members of the presidential cabinet, as well as judicial appointments. Now, stepping back to impeachment for just a minute, the members of Congress do not impeach themselves. There are rules that authorize them to throw out somebody who has, for some reason, violated congressional standards. But they don't impeach themselves. What they do then is they can vote to expel a member of Congress who seriously violated some rule. All right, so that's number 3 is impeachment. Number 4 is appointments. Number 5 is treaties. The Senate approves treaties if they choose to approve them by a 2/3 vote. Finally, Congress has the authority to investigate. Congress does this for many reasons. They might hold an investigative meeting to assist in legislation to get something passed. They might do it to oversee the operations of some other agency, perhaps in the executive branch. They might do it to focus attention on a particular issue, like global warming, for example, that a member of Congress feels that the American public needs more education on. So they will have hearings. They will call in experts, subpoena experts in to testify on whatever subject that the investigation is on. They can use their investigative authority to expose public corruption. Or finally, they can just use it to promote the particular interests of some member of Congress. As I said a minute ago, if you have an interest in exploring global warming, you could use your investigative powers as a member of Congress to do so. Well, all right, that wraps up my brief discussion of Congress and how Congress functions. In the next lecture, we will be talking about the executive branch. Thank you for your time and your attention.